Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to Avenue of Words. I'm so excited you're here with me today because we're about to embark on an absolutely incredible journey together. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to discover something so extraordinary, so mysterious, that it could completely change how we understand history? Imagine walking along a remote beach in Scotland and suddenly stumbling upon artifacts that had been hidden for nearly 700 years. That's exactly what happened in 1831, and today I want to share this absolutely captivating story with you. Today we're diving deep into the fascinating world of the Lewis Chessmen, one of archaeology's most enchanting mysteries. But this isn't just about ancient chess pieces, my friends. This is a story about human connection, about how games and stories transcend time and culture, and about how sometimes the most incredible discoveries happen when we least expect them. So grab your favorite cup of tea or coffee, get comfortable, and let's travel back in time together. I promise you, by the end of our journey today, you'll not only have improved your English listening skills, but you'll also have discovered a story that will stay with you forever. Let me paint you a picture. Picture this. It's a typical day in 1831 on the Isle of Lewis, a remote island in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. The landscape is wild and windswept, with rolling green hills meeting dramatic coastlines. The population is small, maybe just a few thousand people living simple lives, far from the bustling cities of mainland Scotland. Now, here's where our story gets absolutely fascinating. According to some accounts, the chessmen were discovered by a cow that was grazing on sandy dunes along a well-traveled water route between Scotland and Scandinavia. Can you imagine? A cow, just peacefully grazing, accidentally uncovers one of the most significant archaeological finds in British history. But let's slow down for a moment and really think about this discovery. When found, the hoard contained 94 objects, not just chess pieces, but an entire collection that had been carefully hidden away. These weren't just randomly scattered artifacts. Someone, hundreds of years ago, had deliberately buried these precious items, perhaps hoping to return for them someday. The person who found them, and historians aren't entirely certain who exactly, must have felt their heart racing with excitement and confusion. What were these strange, intricately carved figures? Why were they buried here, on this remote Scottish island? How long had they been waiting in the sand and soil for someone to find them? All we know for sure is that the chessmen had to have been found before April 11th, 1831, when they were displayed in Edinburgh at the Society of Antiquaries for Scotland. Think about that timeline. From being buried in a beach to being displayed in Edinburgh, these pieces went from complete obscurity to scholarly attention in what must have been just a few short months. Now, let me describe these chess pieces to you, because when you truly understand their beauty and complexity, you'll appreciate why they've captivated people for nearly 2 centuries. Handcrafted from walrus tusks and whale teeth in the 12th century, these pieces have now become iconic representations of our lifelong passion for war games today. But calling them just chess pieces almost feels like an understatement. These are miniature sculptures, each one a work of art that tells its own story. The craftsmanship is absolutely extraordinary. Every single piece shows incredible attention to detail. The kings sit majestically on their thrones, with flowing beards and crowns that speak of royal dignity. Their faces aren't just carved. They're expressive, showing personality and character that makes you feel like you could have a conversation with them. The queens, and this is particularly fascinating, are shown as powerful figures. They're not demure or secondary characters. Instead, they sit with their hands supporting their faces in poses that suggest deep thought and contemplation. Some historians believe this gesture might represent sorrow or concern, perhaps reflecting the reality that medieval queens often had to make difficult decisions about war and peace. The bishops are equally remarkable. The tall mitres, headdresses, sported by the bishops, have their points in the front and back, an ecclesiastical fashion that did not begin until around 1150. This detail is crucial because it helps historians date these pieces more accurately. The artist who created these knew exactly what bishops should look like, according to the fashion of their time. But perhaps the most famous and beloved pieces are the berserkers, the Viking warriors who served as rooks in the chess set. These figures are absolutely captivating. They're shown biting their shields in what appears to be battle fury, their eyes wide with the intensity of combat. You can almost hear their battle cries echoing across the centuries. Each piece stands between 2 to 4 inches tall, and when you see them in person, many are displayed in the British Museum and the National Museum of Scotland. You can't help but be amazed by how much personality and emotion the artist managed to convey in such small sculptures. What makes the Lewis Chessmen so much more than just game pieces is how they open a window into medieval life and culture. These aren't just decorative objects. They're historical documents carved in walrus ivory and whale tooth. Dating from some time between 1150 and 1200, they were found in a stone cist on a beach on the Isle of Lewis. This was the end of the Viking Age, a time of tremendous change in Northern Europe. The world was transitioning from the warrior culture of the Vikings to the more structured medieval society of kingdoms and Christianity. Think about what life was like during this period. This was a time when chess was becoming increasingly popular among the nobility and educated classes across Europe. Chess wasn't just a game, it was a reflection of medieval society itself. The pieces represented the hierarchy of feudal life, kings and queens at the top, bishops representing the power of the church, knights on horseback, and common soldiers as pawns. But here's what's truly remarkable. These chess pieces show us that even in the 12th century, people understood the value of beautiful objects, of art that went beyond mere functionality. Someone commissioned these pieces not just to play chess, but to own something truly special, something that would demonstrate their wealth, taste, and cultural sophistication. The fact that they were made from walrus ivory tells us something important, too. Walrus ivory was an incredibly valuable material in medieval Europe. It had to be obtained from the Arctic regions, from Greenland, Iceland, or northern Norway. This means these chess pieces represented not just local craftsmanship, but international trade networks that connected the remote islands of Scotland with the far reaches of the North Atlantic. Now, here's where our story becomes a true mystery that historians are still trying to solve today. Where exactly did the Lewis Chessmen come from, and how did they end up buried on a Scottish island? The most widely accepted theory puts the Chessmen's place of origin as Trondheim, Norway, with a popular theory being that they were made in Trondheim in western Norway around 1150-1200. But why Trondheim? What evidence supports this theory? Trondheim was one of the most important cities in medieval Norway, a center of trade, culture, and craftsmanship. It was also the religious center of Norway, home to the cathedral and the seat of the archbishop. If you wanted the finest artistic work done in 12th century Norway, Trondheim would have been the place to go. The style of the chessmen also supports the Norwegian theory. The artistic techniques, the way the figures are carved, the proportions and details, all of these match what we know about Scandinavian artistic traditions of the period. The berserkers, in particular, reflect distinctly Norse warrior culture. But here's the puzzle. If they were made in Norway, how did they end up buried on a Scottish island? The story of the Lewis Chessmen encompasses the whole history of the Vikings in the North Atlantic, from 793 to 1066, when the sea road connected places we think of as far apart and culturally distinct. Norway and Scotland, Ireland and Iceland, the Orkney Islands and Greenland, the Hebrides. This gives us a clue. During the Viking Age and the medieval period that followed, the North Atlantic was like a highway. Ships regularly traveled between Norway, Iceland, the Scottish Islands, and Ireland. The Isle of Lewis wasn't an isolated outpost. It was actually on one of the main maritime routes of the North Atlantic world. So perhaps a merchant was traveling from Norway to Ireland, carrying these valuable chess sets to sell. Maybe a storm forced them to take shelter on Lewis, and they buried their precious cargo, planning to return for it later. But something happened. They died, they were captured, their ship was wrecked, and the chessmen remained buried for centuries. Or perhaps they belonged to a wealthy Norse nobleman who had settled on Lewis. When danger threatened, maybe a raid, maybe a family feud, maybe political upheaval, they buried their most precious possessions, hoping to retrieve them when times were safer. The truth is, we may never know for certain, and in some ways that makes the story even more compelling. As English learners, there's something particularly fascinating about the Lewis Chessmen when we think about language and culture. Chess terminology has traveled across languages and cultures in remarkable ways, and these ancient pieces help us understand that journey. The word chess itself comes from the Persian word shah, meaning king. When the game traveled from Persia to the Arab world, then to Europe, the terminology evolved but maintained its connections. The phrase checkmate comes from the Persian shah mat, meaning the king is dead. But here's what's interesting about the Lewis Chessmen. They represent a moment when this international game was being adapted to local European culture. The pieces don't look Persian or Arabic. Instead, they look distinctly European, distinctly medieval. The bishops, for example, replaced the elephants that appeared in earlier versions of chess. The rooks, represented by the berserkers, evolved from chariots in the original game. This teaches us something important about how language and culture evolve. When ideas, games, or words travel from one culture to another, they don't just get translated. They get transformed. They take on the characteristics, values, and aesthetics of their new home while maintaining their essential function. For English learners, this is exactly what happens when you learn new vocabulary or expressions. You're not just memorizing words, you're participating in this ancient process of cultural exchange and adaptation. Every time you learn a new English phrase and make it your own, you're doing what the craftsman who carved the Lewis Chessmen did, taking something from one culture and giving it new life in your own. Let me pause here to highlight some wonderful English expressions we've encountered in our story today, because improving your English is always our goal at Avenue of Words. When I said grab your favorite cup of tea or coffee, I was using the phrase grab something, which means to quickly get or take something. It's much more casual and friendly than saying obtain or acquire. You might hear native speakers say, grab a bite to eat, or grab a coffee, or grab a seat. We also use the expression paint you a picture, which means to describe something vividly so that the listener can easily imagine it. When someone says, let me paint you a picture, they're about to give you a detailed, colorful description of a situation. Another useful phrase was, takes your breath away, meaning something so beautiful or impressive that it amazes you completely. You might say the sunset took my breath away, or her performance took my breath away. We talked about things that transcend time and culture. The verb transcend means to go beyond normal limits, to be so universal or powerful that it applies across different times or cultures. Love transcends cultural boundaries. Great art transcends time periods. I also use the phrase open a window into, meaning to provide insight or understanding about something. We might say, this book opens a window into life in the 19th century, or her stories opened a window into her childhood. These are exactly the kinds of natural, real-life expressions that will make your English sound more fluent and native-like. Practice using them in your own conversations and writing. After their discovery in 1831, the Lewis Chessmen began a journey that would eventually make them some of the most famous archaeological artifacts in the world. But this journey wasn't immediate or straightforward. Initially, Most of the pieces were acquired by the British Museum in London, while a smaller number went to the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. For many years, they were primarily of interest to historians and archaeologists. The general public wasn't particularly aware of these remarkable artifacts. But gradually, as people learned about their story, the Lewis Chessmen began to capture imaginations. Their combination of artistic beauty, historical mystery, and that wonderful discovery story made them increasingly popular. In the 20th and 21st centuries, they've become true cultural icons. They've appeared in movies, most famously in the Harry Potter films, where replica Lewis Chessmen were used as the wizard chess pieces that Harry, Ron, and Hermione encounter. They've inspired novels, documentaries, and countless works of art. Museums report that the Lewis Chessmen are among their most popular exhibits. People from all over the world come specifically to see these 12th century game pieces. There's something about them that speaks to people across cultures and generations. Why do you think that is? I believe it's because they represent something fundamentally human. They show us that people 800 years ago weren't so different from us. They played games, they appreciated beauty, they created art, they valued craftsmanship. They had the same desires we have for entertainment, for beauty, for objects that reflect their identity and status. As we near the end of our journey together today, I want to share some thoughts about what the Lewis Chessmen can teach us as English learners, and really as learners of any kind. First, consider the patience and dedication that went into creating these pieces. The craftsmen who carved them didn't rush. Each figure required hours, probably days, of careful work. Every detail was considered, every line was deliberate. This is exactly the kind of patience and attention to detail that language learning requires. When you're feeling frustrated with your English progress, remember the Lewis Chessmen. Beautiful, lasting achievements take time. The craftsmen couldn't have created these masterpieces overnight, and you can't master English overnight either. But with consistent effort, attention to detail, and patience with yourself, you can create something remarkable, fluent, confident English communication. Second, think about how these chess pieces have survived for nearly 900 years. What made them last? Quality materials, careful craftsmanship, and the fact that people valued them enough to preserve them. Your English learning will last and serve you well if you focus on quality, really understanding what you learn, practicing carefully, and valuing the process itself, not just the end goal. Third, consider how these pieces have connected people across centuries and cultures. The person who carved them in 12th century Norway probably never imagined that people in the 21st century would still be admiring their work, still be moved by their artistry. In the same way, the English you're learning connects you not just to native speakers today, but to centuries of English literature, history, and culture. You're joining a conversation that has been going on for generations. Finally, remember that these chessmen were discovered by accident, by someone who wasn't even looking for them. Sometimes in language learning, your biggest breakthroughs come when you least expect them. You might be having a casual conversation and suddenly realize you understood every word. You might be watching a movie and notice that you didn't need subtitles. You might write an email and realize how naturally the words flowed. Stay open to these moments of discovery. They're waiting for you, just like the Lewis Chessmen waited for centuries to be found. Before we wrap up, I want to talk about why stories like this one are so powerful for language learning. You've just listened to a 40-minute story entirely in English, and I'd be willing to bet that you understood far more than you might have expected when we started. That's because stories engage different parts of your brain than traditional language lessons do. When you're following a narrative, listening for what happens next, your brain stops focusing on individual words and starts processing meaning in chunks, in context, exactly the way native speakers do. Stories also provide natural repetition. Throughout our journey today, we've encountered words like discovery, mysterious, craftsman, medieval, and artifacts multiple times, but in different contexts. This kind of natural, varied repetition is much more effective than memorizing vocabulary lists. Stories give you cultural context, too. You're not just learning English words, you're learning about English-speaking cultures, about how English speakers think about history, art, mystery, and discovery. This cultural understanding is crucial for truly fluent communication. Most importantly, stories are memorable. You're much more likely to remember new vocabulary and expressions when they're part of a compelling narrative than when they're presented in isolation. Weeks from now, when you hear someone use the phrase, takes your breath away, or paints a picture, you'll remember our journey to the Lewis Chessmen, and that memory will help anchor your understanding. As we reach the end of our time together today, I want you to know how proud I am of you for staying with me through this entire journey. You've just completed 40 minutes of intensive English listening practice, and you should feel genuinely proud of that accomplishment. But more than that, you've experienced something that I hope will stay with you. You've traveled back in time, explored a historical mystery, and connected with people who lived 800 years ago through the beautiful objects they created and treasured. This is what learning English can give you, not just the ability to communicate, but access to stories, ideas, cultures, and connections that span the globe and stretch across time. Every hour you spend improving your English is an investment in your ability to explore and understand our shared human experience. I encourage you to seek out more stories like this one. Read about historical mysteries, archaeological discoveries, ancient cultures. Watch documentaries about art and history. Listen to podcasts about science and exploration. Use your growing English skills to discover the fascinating world around us. Remember, the Lewis Chessmen lay hidden for centuries before being discovered by accident. Your fluent English is there too, waiting to be discovered. Keep practicing, keep listening, keep being curious, and one day, maybe sooner than you think, you'll have your own moment of discovery when you realize just how far you've come. Thank you so much for joining me on Avenue of Words today. If you enjoyed our journey through the mystery of the Lewis Chessmen, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and ring that notification bell so you never miss our new stories and lessons. In the comments below, I'd love to hear from you. What did you find most fascinating about the Lewis Chessmen? Have you ever discovered something unexpected that changed your perspective? And what historical mysteries would you like us to explore together in future videos? Remember, every day is a new opportunity to improve your English, to discover something new about the world, and to connect with others through the power of language and storytelling. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep believing in the amazing things you can achieve. This is Avenue of Words, and I'll see you in our next adventure together. Take care, beautiful souls, and remember, your English journey is just beginning, and the best discoveries are still ahead of you.